Hello and welcome to the Sci-Fi Christian. I am Benny Bono, riding solo here again tonight since my compatriot Ben, as we announced last week, is at a wedding tonight. So he'll be back next week, and kind of like we did last time when he missed, we'll give him a chance to share his thoughts on this episode. I really enjoyed this episode. Well, we'll go through everything, but, suffice to say, this is another one where I think, especially for book readers, it was very satisfying. There's some book theories that seem all but confirmed tonight, some plot points moving forward, and some ways that are exciting. Lots and lots of good stuff. I'm going to save the two most exciting storylines for me, which were Bran and Dany, until the end. And then, I don't know, let's talk about, so let's start with Sam. We didn't actually have that many different places we went tonight. Outside of those two, we had Sam's story with him and Gilly, Arya, Frey's, and King's Landing. So not that busy of an episode location-wise when we think about who we didn't see today. We didn't see Marine. We didn't see John, we didn't see the Iron Island, so a little more focused episode, and that was kind of nice. I'm glad we got some advancement. I'm especially glad that they went back to Bran for that second part. I was, because they've done it a couple times now where it feels like they're just on the cusp of confirming something for us with his storyline, and then they cut away. And right now, I'll be honest, after the last few weeks, I am so into Bran's storyline that the more we get of him, the better. I mean, I'm completely sold on what's going on there, and his is the one I'm looking forward to the most at the moment. But Sam's storyline was kind of a pleasant surprise for me, because Sam and Gilly, we've seen them traveling and all that, and they seem to have been one of the storylines that they haven't been popping up that much, but when they have, it's kind of just to remind us that they're there, and then nothing really of substance happens with them. And I can imagine that some people might have been annoyed about the time spent on them in this episode because it doesn't move the grand plot forward in the way that some of these other storylines are going. But it was a really good character section. And we never have seen in the books Sam interacting with his father and his family, but we've heard about it in a lot more detail in the books than we have on the show. And so it was kind of fun as a book reader, because even though that sequence isn't in the books, or at least not yet in the books, Sam just kind of goes directly to Old Town, where he gets trained is starting to get trained as a maester. He doesn't make this stop at his home first, but we've heard so much about his relationship with his father and all the problems there. And so a lot of this material was actually drawn from those conversations in the books. And I just found it really satisfying. I mean, I've always enjoyed Sam and Gilly's relationship. I think they're two great characters. They work so well together. And, it was great to see Sam not really stand up for himself, but yet still make that effort at the end. He takes the sword. I don't necessarily want this to become a huge subplot, so I'm not too sure how I feel about him taking the sword. I almost would have preferred this be a, kind of a great one-off and go meet his family and everything. And then we move on with that story, and he goes to Old Town like he does in the book, and goes on with his plan to become a maester. But if it, we'll see where they go with it. But I guess my initial reaction is I enjoyed it, but I wish they would have left it a little bit more resolved than they did. But we'll see what they do with it. So, good stuff there. I felt like with both King's Landing and Arya's storylines, those are storylines that both Ben and I have remarked in previous weeks that we're just ready for them to go somewhere. And, well, I don't think they quite got anywhere tonight. Both of them took significant steps to upset the status quo that at this point has gotten fairly stale. So starting with Arya, I can't tell you how happy I was to see more of Shakespeare Game of Thrones playing out. So let's see, we were probably, what, season 4 tonight with Joffrey getting killed at the wedding and then killing, what's his face? Oh, I'm blanking on it'll come to me. Tywin Lannister, that's, yeah, so then him killing Tywin on the toilet, which is great. You know, the gag's probably pretty much played out at this point, but I was glad we got a little bit more before we move on from what has certainly been one of the more amusing inventions on on the show of late. Some nice meta commentary there, of them poking fun at themselves too, with how bad the writing supposedly is. Some great stuff there. And then Arya looks like she's heading out of town. She takes Needle out of its hidey hole. The other girl is off to go kill her at Jake and Hagar's request. And I'm really of mixed feelings about this because on the one hand, I'm really glad to see Arya's story going somewhere. It has been stalled out here for over a season. And yeah, some stuff has happened, but not too much. On the other, it's going to be really annoying if it feels like this whole detour to the Faceless Men and everything they've been building up with Jake and Hagar is ultimately for nothing. You know, if this turns out where she escapes, as she most likely will, from the girl assassin and then returns home, you have to wonder what was that whole subplot that we've been working on since we first met Jake in season 2, and really the whole trajectory of Arya's character, and what does that mean then if we just kind of hit the eject button and ignore all of that, and then she goes back and kind of does whatever she's going to do next. And that's not to say that's necessarily where we're headed, but it makes me a little nervous, and I don't want to see them do that. So I have mixed feelings on that. King's Landing I actually thought was pretty good this week, and this is another storyline where I've been ready for it to move on. Quick side note, just a little piece of Game of Thrones trivia for everybody playing along at home. I was watching Terry Gilliam's movie Brazil over the weekend, and the main character, Sam, so this movie's made in like 1985, so the main character, Sam, in that movie, I'm looking at him as I'm watching the movie, and I'm thinking, this guy looks really familiar. And I look him up on Wikipedia, and it turns out that is the High Septon, Jonathan Pryce, but what would it be now, 30 years younger? So if any Brazil fans out there who haven't made that connection, maybe you all have, but if you like that movie and you haven't made that connection, go check it out. It's kind of fun to see him in that context with an overbearing mother and playing the heroic guy with a love interest and everything. Very, very different character. Anyway, so at first I was kind of wondering what was going on with Marjorie, because she has not seemed on board with what the High Septon has been saying. Even at times where she's maybe given some hints, she seems like she's really pulled back from that, and so to kind of see her being converted was a little bit of a surprise, but sure enough, there seems to be more to the story. I imagine there will be a few different interpretations on this as far as how genuine she was or wasn't about that. But I think the most common one is that she and the High Septon have formed a more political alliance rather than her being a genuine convert. Basically, I'll let you out, but you need to get me allied with Tommen. And that seems to be what has happened. I honestly didn't quite see that coming, which probably makes me really dense. I'm guessing a lot of people did, but I didn't see that twist there coming. I thought it was going to go to blood with the whole showdown with Jaime and then Mace Tyrell, and there was like 10 sparrows there, so it didn't seem like they would pose very much of a threat in the grand scheme of things. Maybe there was more waiting around, but it looked like it was going to be a massacre, and I was kind of thinking in my mind, okay, where's this going to go then? If they kill the High Septon here, is that going to set off a rebellion in the city, and on and on and on? But the Cold War continues, but the High Septon seems to very much have the upper hand now. I hope that even though That storyline isn't quite resolved. It's resolved enough to move it in a different direction than where we've been. He seems to have Tommen under his thumb at this point, and so hopefully that changes up the game enough to make that storyline a little bit more interesting and fresh than it's been, because it's been fairly repetitive for pretty much this whole season. It was really great, in my opinion, to see some of that kind of classic Game of Thrones manipulation and politics at work with the High Sparrow. It was almost Littlefinger-esque the way that he maneuvered this whole thing. So, really good stuff. And then, not to bury the headline here, but Jaime stripped of the Kingsguard, banished to Riverrun. Or not banished per se, but it certainly felt like a banishment, at least kind of how he's feeling it, where he's supposed to go help the Freys retake Riverrun, which has been taken by Brynden the Blackfish. Speaking of the Freys, who called it? I'm sure I wasn't the only one, but the Freys are back in, well, the fray. I knew we hadn't seen the last of the Freys. Now, they're not... I'm a little surprised to see them entering in on that storyline, but since we know that somebody was heading to Riverrun, I forget which of, because there's Melisandre and Davos and Jon and Sansa, and they were all going different places. I forget which one of them was heading to Riverrun, but we know that Riverrun seems to be a place where a lot of these stories are going to collide. And I'm sure, I am positive that the Freys are going to wind up with the Ramsay storyline there, because Ramsay killed a Frey. And we know what happens when you just don't want to marry a Frey. Now look what happens when you murder one of them. He actually, technically, well, I suppose the son that was born, Roose Bolton's son, wasn't a Frey. It would have been a Bolton, but he was Walder Frey's grandchild, so it makes it that much worse. I can only imagine what's going to happen when Walder Frey catches wind of that. I'm glad to see him back on the show. He's certainly a villain right up there with Ramsay, needs to be dealt with, and so I'm really excited to see what's going on there. Edmure, I didn't expect to see him again, though. So, kind of interested to see. I mean, it seems like they're going to use him as a pawn or whatever, but interesting to see that character back on the show. I don't care too much about Edmure one way or the other, but interesting to see them now pulling back some of these same storylines from earlier seasons, which has kind of been my argument for what this season is going to look like all along, and we keep continuing to see stuff from the early seasons coming back, including Jaime now going to war in the Riverlands, which, if you go back to season 1, is where he was fighting when he got captured by Robb. Or maybe that was season 2, whenever he got captured by Robb. And so good stuff there. I'm really excited to see where all of that goes. Alright, now the two big ones. Let's start with Dany. First of all, more encouraging signs. Last week we saw her make a reference to taking the Seven Kingdoms, and now it sounds like we're making a quick pit stop in Meereen, and then off to Westeros. Now, it'll probably be a little bit more involved than that, but she seems finally headed in that direction. We finally got to see her riding a dragon for real. What I mean by that is that, yes, at the end of last season we saw her get onto the dragon and fly off, but then he just kind of dubbed her off, and it was more divine intervention, for lack of a better term. Dragon intervention, I guess. I don't know. But Dany wasn't really in charge of that. She wasn't in charge of... I think it's Drogon is the one who's there. She wasn't in charge of Drogon showing up, and then he kind of gets on her, flies away, and she's never really in control of that whole situation. Well, here she is. She goes and... I don't know how she found a dragon whistle or whatever. But anyway, she does it, and she gets on his back, and now she is in control. She's riding him not just as a convenient escape, where she'll then be abandoned in the middle of the plains. She is riding him like the queen that we've been waiting for her to become. And so I think that this was one of those moments that we've been waiting for ever since we saw those dragons at the end of season 1, or at the end of book 1, for those of us who read the books first. And really, really excited to see where that's going. I'm glad they're going to go deal with business in Marine. You know, the 1,000 ships that she's looking for is conveniently the same number that the Ironborn are building, which, by the way, very amusing to see that people pointed out that we haven't seen a single tree on the Iron Islands in all the shots that we've had of in the series of that place. So not quite sure where they're going to get their wood for the 1,000 ships, but we'll just trust to movie magic on that line, on that logical line. But anyway, she's going to, I would assume it's a safe bet that those are going to come together somehow, and she's going to be the one in control of those 1,000 ships and head back to Westeros. But that seems to be where we're headed anyway. So I would look for her to be on her way back to Westeros in control of those ships by the end of the season, which is a very good sign that we're going to have some exciting stuff with her storyline in seasons 7 and 8. No more just hanging around Marine forever and ever. Amen. I was really worried about where her storyline was going to go when we saw her going with the Dosh Khaleen and Vase Dothrak. We're just going to have to endure her sitting around this whole season. Nope, it feels like we're not getting a ton of her, but she is heading in the right direction, and that is great. And finally, Bran. Like I said, I am all in on Bran's storyline. Okay, first, let's talk about those various flashes that he was having as Mira is pulling him on the cart. You know, he's warged out or whatever, and he's having lots of flashes. First of all, the guy who's yelling, "Burn them all," for those who might not have made the connection, that is the Mad King Aerys. He is, presumably, his wildfire there. I believe, now I've only just watched the episode, so I'm sure we're going to, somewhere online shortly, there will be a shot-by-shot breakdown of those visions that will provide more depth. But I believe we saw Jaime killing the Mad King. We had a flashback to the Tower of Joy. We had various flashes of the Night King throughout. So really exciting stuff going on there. And then the dude shows up. Now, we all know it's Benjen for having watched the episode, but let's back up a second. And let me first say how awesome it is that Benjen's alive. Okay, now let's back up a second. For all of us who are book readers, there's a character who shows up in the books, around book 3, I think, called Cold Hands. Now, I'll go ahead and tell everybody here about Cold Hands, because either Cold Hands is Benjen, and this is who we're seeing, or he's not going to show up in the show. So it really doesn't matter. But anyway, we meet this character when Bran... Well, actually, I think we meet him first with Sam. He shows up in both of their storylines, and Sam and Gilly are north of the wall, and they're making their way down. And then later he shows up and he helps them, and he seems able to defeat the White Walkers, but he seems like he might be kind of a White Walker himself. Later on, he helps Bran and Hodor and all those guys. At least I think he does. You know, if I'm butchering the scenes that Cold Hands is in, I apologize. But suffice to say, there's this interesting character who appears to be White Walker-ish, but definitely isn't like any of the White Walkers that we've seen. And there's been a lot of speculation in the books about who this guy is. And one of the main theories is that he is Benjen Stark. Okay, so we have the first scene with Bran and Benjen, who we don't know who he is, though I'm imagining many of us guessed, shows up and he does his thing, and I wrote down in my notes, Cold Hands, ? Because this guy seems exactly like Cold Hands in the book. So for all of you book readers out there, I'm convinced, but I'm curious what other people think. I think that this is Cold Hands, or we're getting confirmation that Cold Hands is in fact Benjen Stark. Whether or not that's right, it's pretty awesome that Benjen is alive. We learned that he was kind of killed by a White Walker and then revived by the Children of the Forest in a way very similar to how they made the White Walkers, which is another Cold Hands connection. Because Cold Hands, again, like I said, seems like a White Walker but isn't. So now Benjen seems like a White Walker but isn't. Even more significant, though, let's not let this fly under the radar, is that Benjen is referring to Bran as the Three-Eyed Raven. Okay, Bran is the new Three-Eyed Raven, or the way that it's put, Mira says the Three-Eyed Raven is dead, and then Benjen says he is alive again, or something like that. That's probably not the exact dialogue. Anyway, Bran is, according to Benjen, the new Three-Eyed Raven. Now, we heard all this stuff in the last few weeks about Bran being the successor or whatever, or taking over, but this is very much more clearly stated that Bran has a strong connection to the Three-Eyed Raven, is in fact now the same thing, whatever that guy was, and seems to be able to, or at least on the cusp of being able to wander at will in the past. I couldn't be more excited about where Bran's storyline is going. Great to see what I think is the Cold Hands Benjen confirmation. Great to have Benjen back. Just so much exciting stuff happening in this season. If, like me, if you've just been reading this series for close to 15 years probably, I don't know how you can't be thrilled just to see so many different things coming together. And yeah, it's not Martin's version, and yes, Martin's version is going to be different, and I can't wait for that. I'm much more excited about that. But I will take what I can get, and what I can get right now is a version of the story that is proving to be very satisfying to somebody who's been waiting so long to see how some of this stuff is going to play out. So I am thrilled, and I can't wait to see where we go next week, and even more thrilled that I will have Ben back with me next week, and I think he'll be here for the rest of the season. So 4 more to go. We'll be back next week to break down what will hopefully be another exciting episode. But until then, I am Ben Bond, and this is the Sci-Fi.